The title of the art exhibit was Sex. It was hosted by Julian Vance, my wife's old flame, the one that got away. 99 oil paintings in total, and in every single one a different position, a different act of pleasure, featuring him and my wife, Victoria. That day, the hashtag #cuckoldedbycroft hit #1 on Twitter. In a blind rage, I'd smashed the entire gallery. In response, Julian threw a fit and skipped town. To coax him back, Victoria demanded I apologize. I refused. We were to standoff. So, she had her security detail pull the surveillance footage of me destroying the gallery and send a courier to the rehab center in Jersey. She wanted my mother, paralyzed by a stroke, to be the judge. And while she was at it, to admire the wall-to-wall exhibition of shattered, erotic bodies. It was a 30-minute drive from the gallery to the center. The location tracker on my phone showed the car was already more than halfway there. Less than 10 minutes to go. The seconds bled away. I balled my fists, feeling the blood in my veins turn to ice. I fought back tears. Victoria, you know my mom. She's old-fashioned, deeply religious. A spectacle like that. Are you trying to kill her? Victoria, lounging on the custom-made sofa, finally looked up. She arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, as if she couldn't comprehend what the problem was. I don't want her to die, Nate, she said, her voice infuriatingly calm. You're the one who made a scene. Just apologize to Julian, and this all goes away. I was the one who made a scene? She was the one sleeping with Julian, turning their sordid encounters into a public spectacle, making sure the entire New York City elite knew she'd made a fool of me. And now, somehow this was all my fault. I stared at her, and the foundation of our years together cracked right down the middle. Another 5 minutes passed. If I don't apologize, I asked, my voice a raw whisper, will you really show it to her? You could always find out. She was the picture of composure, inspecting her freshly manicured nails. It's your call. Place your bet. A bet? This wasn't a game I could afford to lose. I squeezed my eyes shut. A single hot tear escaped, splashing onto the polished hardwood floor. My whole body was trembling, seized by a bone-deep chill. In the end, I had lost to Julian Vance. Again, the three of us had been at NYU together. Victoria and Julian were the power couple of the Tisch School of the Arts. Gorgeous, talented, inevitable. I was just another music major at Steinhardt with a hopeless crush on Victoria Croft, watching their perfect life from the shadows. Then, junior year, Julian abruptly broke up with her and vanished, off to study abroad. Victoria changed. She became ferocious, channeling everything into her painting. She even put out a public call for a model. Half the male student body lined up, practically tripping over themselves for the chance. I went to, and she chose me. That's how it started. When I asked her why she'd picked me, she said I had the refined air of a gentleman, that when I sat at the piano and played her favorite pieces, I was like a prince from a dream. My face burned, but my heart soared. From then on, we had our daily appointments. I never expected anything more. Just being near her was enough. Until one night, she was drunk. She cornered me in the studio, her eyes hazy with desire. You're in love with me, aren't you? Yes, I'd said, my heart hammering against my ribs. I met her gaze, finally brave enough to speak my truth. The next second, her lips were on mine, wet and hungry. She devoured me. We spent the night locked in a frenzy of passion, over and over, until the first light of dawn crept through the studio windows. We were a couple. I introduced her to my mom. Things were good, better than good. Then came the art competition. Victoria painted an intimate portrait of us and won a major award. It was her big break, but I became the subject of gossip. The news reached my conservative hometown, whispers about the shameless woman I'd taken up with, airing our private life for the world to see. They said I clearly had no proper upbringing. The stress of it all triggered my mother's stroke. I was wrecked with guilt at the hospital. Victoria held me, whispering, I'm so sorry, Nate. I never knew this would happen. I'll take care of her. I'll be responsible for everything. And she was. That award catapulted her into the art world stratosphere. In 5 short years, she went from a broke art student to a billionaire CEO, and I became the enviable Mr. Croft. She was kind to me, generous. She arranged the best medical care for my mother. I thought our life would be one of happiness and ease. But the moment Julian Vance came back, it all crumbled to dust. She brought him into our home, a Greenwich mansion, under the guise of him having nowhere else to go. She took him to every high-profile event as her +1, calling it artistic collaboration. And now, for a simple apology, she was willing to hold my mother's life in the balance. Fine, I bit out, my hand trembling as I pulled out my phone and dialed Julian's number. I was out of line today. I'm sorry. As the words left my mouth, The courier arrived at the rehab center. Victoria made a quick call to recall him, then stood up, satisfied. She walked over, placing a cool hand on my cheek. Good boy, she purred. I didn't want to have to do that. Just don't be so impulsive next time. She left to go pick up Julian. I stood there, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. Humiliation and despair churned in my gut, a nauseating cocktail that made it hard to breathe. Didn't want to do it? A bitter, silent laugh escaped my lips. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Jersey Shore Rehabilitation Center. My heart seized. I snatched it up, and a panicked voice filled my ear. Mr. Shaw, it's not good. Your mother. Her condition has taken a turn for the worse. ####. When I got there, my mother was barely breathing. I fell to my knees beside the bed, my hand swallowing hers, so frail and cold. A sob caught in my throat. Mom, what happened? What's wrong? She couldn't answer, her eyes wide and fixed on something behind me. I followed her gaze. The television mounted on the wall was cycling through a news segment. The headline blared across the screen. Billionaire CEO Victoria Croft bears all for old flames our career. Publicity stunt or affair. A roar filled my ears. The screen was filled with images of the paintings from the gallery. My entire world went cold. Tears flooded my vision, and I couldn't bring myself to look back at my mother, my mind a vortex of panic. Her fingers tightened around mine, a surprising flicker of strength. She tried to sit up, straining with all her might, but couldn't move an inch. Finally, her lips parted, forcing out a single, raspy word. Divorce. Then a long, final beep from the heart monitor. Mom! I screamed, and the world went black. When I woke up the next day, the rehab center staff had already prepared my mother's body for transport. One of the administrators offered his condolences. Mr. Shaw, we tried calling Ms. Croft several times last night, but she must have been busy. We're so sorry for your loss. Please accept our deepest sympathies. I managed a brittle, broken smile. Of course she was busy. She was busy comforting her precious Julian. She wouldn't have time for this, and I didn't need her anymore. It's fine, I said, my voice hollow. You don't need to worry about it. I'll take my mother now. The next 2 days were a blur of arrangements. My mom was a single parent. It had always been just the two of us. We didn't have any close relatives. After the cremation, I took her ashes directly to a quiet cemetery plot. There was no funeral, just me, bowing my head to the earth 100 times, repenting for having loved the wrong person. Returning to the Greenwich mansion felt like entering a foreign country. The moment I walked in, I saw him. Julian. He was sitting barefoot on the priceless Persian rug, wearing a crisp white shirt, flinging paint from a brush onto a canvas. Splatters of color dotted the carpet, the same carpet I had to hand wash every single week. Victoria, who was normally a notorious neat freak and confined all painting to the studio, was walking toward him with a bowl of washed strawberries. She gently placed one in his mouth, her expression tender. Then she wiped a smudge of paint from his cheek. You genius, she murmured, her voice laced with adoration. Finish your dinner before you get back to work. I glanced at the dining table. It was covered in dishes, every single one of them spicy. I couldn't handle spicy food. It was Julian's favorite, and she had cooked. For him. In my eyes, her hands were sacred, meant only for creating art. I wouldn't have let her wash a single pair of my socks, let alone cook a meal. But now I saw it was all my own foolish sentimentality. I thought the pain of the last 2 days had numbed me, but the scene twisted a knife in my gut. I stumbled, making a sound. They both looked up. Victoria's expression was one of surprise. Julian just smirked, triumphant. Nate, you're back. Just in time for dinner. He sounded like the man of the house. I ignored him and started for the stairs. Victoria's face hardened. Julian is talking to you, she snapped. I paused for a second, then continued up the steps. She strode over and grabbed my arm, her grip like steel. What are you sulking about now? I had the story taken down from the tabloids. Mom will never know. What more do you want? The mention of my mother sent a tremor through me. I turned, looked at her, and a bitter smile touched my lips. I don't want anything. It doesn't matter if the story is gone or not. Because my mother was already dead. Nothing mattered anymore. Seeing the raw pain on my face, Victoria's expression flickered with something unreadable. She looked like she was about to ask something, but I pulled my arm from her grasp and went upstairs. Lying on the bed, the tears I'd been holding back finally came. My mind was filled with the image of my mother's dying face, her last word echoing in my head. Divorce. It wasn't the first time I'd thought of it. When Julian moved in, I'd argued, I'd fought, I'd even threatened to leave. But Victoria had always refused, which made me wonder who she truly loved. Now, I didn't want to wonder anymore. If she wouldn't let me go, I I would disappear. Before I came back, I placed an order. A custom-made, hyper-realistic prosthetic body. It would be delivered in 5 days. Then I would die in an accident and start a new life under a new identity. And I would finally be free of Victoria Croft. The next day, Julian knocked on my bedroom door. When I opened it, he was leaning against the frame, dressed in an expensive, custom-tailored suit, a roguish grin on his face. "Nate, my man, there's an art auction today. You should come." I stared at him for a beat. "Not interested," I said, moving to close the door. He caught it with his hand, then draped an arm around my shoulders, his expression turning apologetic. "Hey, are you still mad about the gallery thing?" The gallery. The shame was instant, hot, and overwhelming. "Yes," I said, shrugging his arm off. I stared at him, my voice cold as ice. "What? Are you here to apologize? Or are you going to paint your family's sex life and put it on display for me?" His smile vanished. Just then, Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes dangerously cold. She swept forward, pulling Julian behind her, as if to protect him. "Don't you dare go too far," she seethed. "How could you say something like that? I told you, we didn't cross a line. It was for art. If you're angry, take it out on me. Don't bully Julian." Her words were like daggers. Even now, she was defending him, cloaking her infidelity in the noble shroud of art. Art. I let out a hollow laugh. "When you were planning that exhibit for him, did you ever, for 1 second, think about me? Do you have any idea what people are saying about me?" Victoria looked at me without a trace of guilt. "Then let them talk," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Why are you being so petty? Anyway, today's auction is important. Stop wasting time." Petty? That's what she thought of me. The word was a blade, twisting in my heart, leaving me raw and bleeding. I looked down, a bitter chuckle escaping my lips. There was nothing more to say. In 4 days, I would be gone. I didn't want any more complications. So I went with them to the auction. It was a charity event. All proceeds would be donated to build art programs for underprivileged kids in Appalachia. It was a regular part of the art world's social calendar, a way to polish their public image. At the auction, Victoria bid aggressively, snapping up several pieces. She spent tens of millions, and, as always, she made the donations in my name. The crowd murmured their approval, praising what a devoted husband I was. I just smiled silent. It all felt like a performance now. But Julian was seething, a sly, calculating look in his eyes. I was bored, ready to leave, when they wheeled out the next piece. It was a life-size sculpture about 3 feet tall, covered by a red cloth. When they unveiled it, the room gasped. It was a sculpture of a young woman, squatting, one hand tugging at a translucent slip of fabric, her head bowed shyly. The sheer material barely concealed her breasts, an invitation to a deeper, more intimate exploration. And the face. The face was an exact likeness of Julian's younger sister. The men in the room stared, their eyes gleaming with raw, primitive desire. Adam's apples bobbed. Bidding paddles shot up. 5 million. I'll do 10. The bids doubled and redoubled. The room buzzed with speculation. Who donated this piece? It's so explicit. It has to be Mr. Shaw. Did you see the gossip sites a few days ago? This is his revenge. Julian doesn't have a wife, so he's going after his sister. That's cold-blooded. I frowned. This wasn't my doing. But before I could say a word, Julian shot to his feet, his face a mask of outrage. "Why would you drag my sister into this?" he yelled at me. Then, his voice softened as he turned to Victoria. "Tori, my sister is innocent. If Nate won't back down, I'll get on my knees and apologize to him right now. Just please, don't let them sell this sculpture." He made a show of bending his knees as if to kneel. Victoria caught his hand, pulling him back up. "You don't need to apologize to him," she soothed. Her face was a cold, hard mask. She made a silent, imperious gesture to her assistant, a command to buy it, no matter the price. Then she spun around, her eyes blazing with fury as she glared at me. She looked like she wanted to eat me alive. I flinched. It wasn't me. Smack. The word was cut short by the sharp, clean sound of her palm connecting with my cheek. "And you're still going to deny it?" Victoria's chest heaved with rage. "I thought you were just making empty threats, but you were planning this all along. What do you have to say for yourself now?" My ears were ringing. It was all too perfect, too coincidental. My off-the-cuff remark this morning. And now this. Unless. I lifted my head, my gaze sharp as I looked at Julian. He was smirking, all traces of his earlier distress gone. The culprit was obvious. "Why are you glaring at Julian?" Victoria snapped, her anger escalating. "Are you going to throw a tantrum now that you've been caught? This is my fault. I've been too lenient with you. It's time you learn a lesson." Lenient? When had she ever been lenient with me? And if she had, it certainly wasn't for my benefit. Her cruel words still found a way to hurt. I couldn't help but let out a self-deprecating laugh. And how do you plan to teach me a lesson this time, Is Croft? Force another apology? Threaten my mother with those photos again? It didn't matter. I wasn't afraid of any of it anymore. But it was neither. She took me back to the mansion and threw me into the abandoned storage shed in the backyard. It was my other great fear. As the heavy door began to close, I grabbed the frame, my body shaking uncontrollably. Victoria, you can't leave me in here. I was afraid of the dark, claustrophobic, a childhood trauma she knew all about. She'd even stopped sleeping with the lights off to accommodate me. And now, for Julian, she was using it as a weapon. This punishment was too cruel. I told you. Victoria looked down at me, her face devoid of pity. Her voice was resolute. You need to be taught a lesson. Otherwise, you'll just keep bullying Julian. Her bodyguards pried my fingers from the door and slammed it shut. Darkness enveloped me. I pounded on the door, screaming, but the only response was the damp, metallic smell of rust and the scuttling of mice in the corners. My breath came in ragged gasps. I curled into a ball, and soon, the world faded to black. I had a dream. In it, I was telling my mother I wanted to marry Victoria Croft. But my mother saw right through her. Son, she said, her eyes full of sorrow, she doesn't love you. You'll regret this. She was right. I was beginning to regret it, but it was too late. The next day, the shed door opened. It wasn't Victoria. Julian had someone let me out. He was alone in the living room, dressed in his trademark white shirt, painting at an easel. He looked like a picture of youthful innocence, but I knew better. There was nothing simple about him. He stopped painting as I walked in. You're a mess, but still handsome. I can see why Victoria fell for you. Too bad for you. I've decided I want my spot back. I looked at him, my expression blank, and then managed a small, indifferent smile. You want it? It's all yours. Julian blinked. Then his face flushed with anger. I don't need you to let me have it. She was always my woman. If I'd known she was going to be this successful, I never would have left with that old hag for Europe. You wouldn't have even had a chance. So, she really had been dumped. I let out a soft laugh. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I should feel sorry for her or mock her. What are you laughing at? Julian snarled. My calm demeanor felt like punching a pillow to him, and he was about to lash out when his eyes flickered toward the doorway. Someone was coming. A vicious gleam entered his eyes. He threw himself backward, crashing into the easel. Everything went flying. With shocking speed and precision, he slammed his right hand down onto a sharp utility knife that had clattered to the floor. My hand. Blood pooled on the floor. ####. Victoria froze in the doorway, stunned. A second later, she rushed to Julian's side, helping him up. When she saw his hand gushing blood, her face went white. Someone call a doctor, she screamed. I was shocked, too. I stared at the spreading pool of blood on the floor. Julian was insane, terrifyingly so. The family doctor hurried in. After applying pressure to stop the bleeding, he said gravely, we need to get him to a hospital. The cut is very deep. It looks like he may have damaged some nerves. There could be permanent side effects. Julian's face crumpled. Permanent side effects? What does that mean? Will I still be able to paint? The doctor's silence was answer enough. Julian turned to Victoria, tears streaming down his face. Tori, what am I going to do? Victoria's heart broke for him. She pulled him into an embrace. Before she could offer a word of comfort, he looked up, his gaze locking on me. Nate, why would you do this to me? What? Victoria finally seemed to notice I was there. A terrible suspicion dawned on her. What are you doing out here? She demanded. Before I could answer, Julian started sobbing. I felt bad for him. I had him let out. But I didn't think he still hated me so much. He pushed me right onto the knife. He choked on a sob, his body racked with grief. I didn't push him, I said flatly. I was exhausted. I didn't want to deal with this, but I had to defend myself. He fell on purpose. You can check the security cameras. A simple check would reveal the truth. But Victoria wasn't listening. Her face was a thunderous mask, her eyes blazing. You mean to tell me that Julian would risk his hand, his entire future, just to frame you? Do you think I'm an idiot? She snarled. Nathaniel, you are a monster. She still didn't believe me. Of course. I opened my mouth, then closed it, a bitter laugh dying in my throat. I looked up at the ceiling, my eyes stinging. So what now? What now? She repeated, her voice low and dangerous. She gritted her teeth. Now, you get a taste of your own medicine. An eye for an eye. You ruined Julian's hand, so we'll take one of yours. She signaled to her bodyguards. Two of them pinned my right hand to the floor. Another stood over me, holding a heavy iron hammer, waiting for the command. My eyes turned red. I struggled with all my might, but they held me fast. I could only look at Victoria, my voice pleading. Victoria, I didn't push him. Check the cameras. It wasn't me. She didn't even look at me. She helped Julian up, and as they walked past me toward the door, she left me with one cold, final sentence. I don't need to check. I believe him. The words hung in the air. The hammer fell. A sickening crack echoed through the room. Aard! A scream ripped from my throat, tearing through the mansion. My face contorted, a tidal wave of agony shooting from my hand straight to my heart. My vision blurred. Cold sweat soaked my shirt. So much pain. So cold. I stared desperately at the doorway, watching their silhouettes shrink and disappear. Then my world went dark. A single scalding tear rolled down my cheek. Victoria, I regret it. I regret ever meeting you. And I regret ever loving you. ####. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room. I opened my eyes, my head still foggy. A doctor was standing over me, his expression grim. Your right hand sustained a severe crushing injury. I'm afraid there will be permanent after effects. The words hit me like a physical blow. I tried to sit up, but a sharp, searing pain from my hand shot through my arm, jolting me fully awake. The memories of what happened before I passed out came flooding back, each one a fresh stab to my heart. My voice was a hoarse croak. What kind of after effects? You'll likely experience a significant loss of grip strength, chronic stiffness, and difficulty with fine motor skills. For now, the priority is to let the bone heal. We'll monitor your progress after that. He was phrasing it nicely. It was a death sentence. My hand was ruined. The doctor looked away, a flicker of pity in his eyes, and left the room. My face was ashen, my gaze unfocused. I lifted my right hand. It was encased in a heavy plaster cast. I couldn't feel anything but a deep, throbbing ache. How could it be ruined? Victoria's words echoed in my head. Take one of yours. Huh. She was a woman of her word. I had done nothing, yet she believed Julian without question and made me pay with my own hand. Why? The word was a strangled cry. I buried my face in my pillow, biting down on my lip to stifle the sobs, but the tears came anyway, soaking the thin cotton. After a long time, the crying subsided. I sat up and ate dinner in silence, my eyes vacant, all the light gone from them. Later, I needed to use the restroom. With my hand out of commission, I had to call for a male nurse to help me. Seeing my cast, he asked conversationally, "That's a bad break. How come your family isn't here to help you out?" I paused, a shadow of grief crossing my face. "I don't have any family," I said softly. "My mother was dead. As for Victoria, my wife in name only, she was dead to me, too. Besides, she had probably forgotten I even existed." The nurse, waiting outside the door, spoke with sympathy. "That's tough, man. A guy really needs a good wife to take care of him. A rich, doting one would be even better." He chuckled. "Like that artist guy who came in this afternoon, Julian Vance." My blood ran cold. "He just had a small cut on his palm." The nurse continued, oblivious. "The test came back fine, no serious damage. But his wife, man, she wouldn't let it go. Insisted on calling in the top orthopedic specialist in the city. Wouldn't rest until they confirmed 3 times that he was okay. Now, that's a good woman." He had no idea that the good woman he was describing was my wife, and that her devotion was reserved for Julian alone. I hadn't wanted to care, but hearing it laid out so plainly was like a physical blow. I nearly collapsed, my hand bracing against the cold tile wall. The feeling of injustice surged, hot and bitter, and fresh tears welled in my eyes. Julian's hand was fine, and for that, I had paid this terrible price. The next day, Victoria came to pick me up from the hospital, but she wasn't taking me home. She drove me to a lavish private club in the city, to a birthday party for Julian. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. She ignored me, her expression one of self-righteous certainty. "Julian has already forgiven you," she said. "I want you too to bury the hatchet." She then walked over to Julian, handing him a set of car keys, her eyes practically overflowing with adoration. "Happy birthday, Julian." A black curtain behind them dropped, revealing a sleek, black supercar. I knew that car. It was a one-of-a-kind model, a global exclusive. I had seen it once and fallen in love, but Victoria had told me it was a concept car, not for sale. Now I knew the truth. I was a joke. Julian's eyes lit up. He beamed at Victoria, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Thank you, Tori." They stared at each other, lost in their own world, as the crowd around them cheered. They looked like a couple madly in love. The sight was a dagger in my heart. I clenched my fists and walked out, needing air. After a long time, I went back inside. As I passed a private room, I stopped. Through a crack in the door, I saw 2 bodies tangled together. A woman moaned, and a man threw his head back in satisfaction. The man's face. It was Julian. I was frozen in place. Just then, a voice came from behind me. What are you doing here? I jumped, spinning around. It was Victoria. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. I flinched and slammed the door shut. Before I could figure out what to say, a desperate voice called from inside the room. Tori, help me. Victoria's eyes darkened. She shoved me aside. Just as she was about to open the door, Julian stumbled out, his face flushed, looking feverish and disoriented. Behind him, a middle-aged woman looked thoroughly annoyed. Victoria must have guessed what was happening, but she couldn't quite believe it. What's going on? She asked, her lip trembling. It was Nate, Julian stammered, tugging at his tie, his mouth dry. He gave me a drink. After I drank it, I felt strange. And this woman, she said she'd paid, that I had to sleep with her. My world tilted on its axis. I did not. I couldn't believe he would pin this on me. I looked at him, my face a cold mask, all previous sympathy gone. They were both willing participants. Victoria, don't let him fool you. Shut up, she roared. Her eyes were venomous. Nathaniel, you are despicable. If you didn't do it, why were you lurking outside the door? Why did you slam it shut the second you saw me? It hit me then. I had walked right into another one of Julian's traps. Nothing I said would matter. But I couldn't just take the blame. I was just passing by. I wasn't lurking, and I certainly have no interest in drugging him. Just then, the older woman spoke up. Mr. Shaw, I pay good money. You promised I'd be satisfied. Is this it? I'm not in the business of forcing people. She smoothed her dress and walked away. Now I had no defense. Victoria glared at me, then stormed into the room. She picked up a glass from the table. Sure enough, there was a faint white residue on the rim. Next to it, a small camera was propped up. Her face turned black with fury. She marched back to me. You were trying to slander him, weren't you? She accused, her voice shaking with rage. Julian has just started to make a name for himself, and you wanted to leak a story about him being a prostitute. You are a vile, cruel man. Her words fell. I looked down. She would never believe me. A sad smile touched my lips. I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. I just looked at her, my heart aching. I have no interest in getting revenge on him. I turned to leave. Victoria blocked my path. You think you could just walk away after this? She sneered. Julian may be forgiving, but I am not. The next thing I knew, I was tied to a chair, my mouth sealed with duct tape. Victoria walked to Julian, cupping his face gently. Julian, are you feeling awful? She asked, her voice soft and tender. He nodded weakly. Tori, don't get too close. I'm afraid I'll lose control. Then don't, she whispered, standing on her toes to press a kiss to his throat. I'm right here. I can be your antidote. Panic flared in my chest. I struggled violently against the ropes, muffled screams tearing from my throat, trying to stop her. Victoria turned to look at me, her expression matter of fact. You owe him this, Nathaniel. Don't blame me. Just then, Julian wrapped his arms around her from behind, burying his face in her neck. His hands slid under her clothes, unhooking her bra, his fingers closing over her breast. Within moments, Victoria melted. She leaned back against him, responding to his every touch with a burning passion. They moved from one end of the sofa to the other, then to the window, their bodies crashing together. Victoria, I screamed, a desperate, hysterical sound that came out as a muffled sob. The rage could only churn inside me, a helpless, burning fire. To watch my wife taking pleasure from another man, right in front of me. I want to kill them both. I fought against the ropes with everything I had, my wrists and ankles bleeding from the friction, but they held fast. I finally lost my balance, crashing to the floor, chair and all. But the noise I made only seemed to fuel their passion. They didn't stop. They became even more fervent, their frantic lovemaking continuing for what felt like an eternity. After it was over, Julian privately called the police. I was taken to the station. I sat there in a daze, a marionette with its strings cut, staring blankly at the wall. For half an hour, I didn't say a word. The officer across from me was getting impatient. Not knowing what else to do, he went through the motions, calling Victoria. Ms. Croft, are you Nathaniel Shaw's wife? Victoria paused. Yes. The officer immediately put the phone on speaker and hit record. Mr. Shaw has been implicated in a solicitation case. As it's not a major offense, we've decided to be lenient. If you come down and pay the fine, you can take him home. Before he could finish, a cold laugh crackled through the speaker. Nathaniel, how long are you going to play the victim? Victoria's voice dripped with contempt. You actually had the nerve to drag the police into this? You might have an appetite for this kind of drama, but I don't have time to play along. She addressed the officer directly. Officer, since he broke the law, as his legal guardian, I can't just cover for him. Let him spend a night in a holding cell. Maybe it will teach him to think about his actions. The line went dead. The room was silent. I felt my eyelashes flutter. A bitter smile touched my lips. I spent the night in a cell. And in that long, dark night, I was completely, terrifyingly awake. I sat on the cold bench from dusk till dawn, my mind perfectly clear, silently counting down the hours. One more day, just one more day, and I would be free. The next morning, I was released. I didn't go back to the mansion. I went to the cemetery. I wanted to see my mother one last time before I left for good. But when I got to her plot, the grave was empty. What do you mean? I demanded of the groundskeeper. Your mother's ashes were relocated. A mister. Vance came by yesterday with a written authorization from you. He paid the transfer fee and the maintenance costs, so we allowed it. Julian again? How did he know my mother was dead? My mind reeling with questions, I raced back to the mansion. The moment I stepped through the gate, I saw him. Julian was in the yard, trimming a potted plant. The flowers were blooming beautifully. He held the pot in his hands, admiring it with a look of deep satisfaction. I strode over, grabbed his arm, and spun him around. Where are my mother's ashes? Crash. The pot shattered on the stone patio. I didn't care. All I wanted to know was where my mother was. My hands were shaking with rage. Julian glanced at me, then looked down at the mess of soil and broken ceramic on the ground, his expression unconcerned. Such a shame. He sighed, but a smirk played on his lips. I was going to give it to you as a gift. Can't blame me for this. I looked down. In the dark soil, mixed in with the dirt and pebbles, were streaks of grayish-white powder. A powder that looked terrifyingly like human ashes. A violent tremor ran through me. I dropped my knees. Just then, a nearby sprinkler head hissed to life, sending a torrent of water across the patio, washing away the mixture of soil and ash. No, I scrambled to scoop it up, grabbing handful after handful, but the white powder slipped through my fingers with the flowing water, disappearing into the mud along with my tears. My mother's ashes. Gone. Julian. I looked up at him, my eyes burning with a murderous hatred. I launched myself at him, my hands reaching for his throat, but before I could touch him, a fist slammed into my jaw, sending me sprawling to the ground. Victoria had come out. Seeing me fighting with Julian, she immediately called for the bodyguards to pull us apart. She slapped me hard across the face. You just got back, and you're already starting trouble? What is wrong with you? I couldn't hear her. My only thought was to tear Julian limb from limb, to avenge my mother. But I was restrained, helpless. All I could do was scream at Victoria, my eyes wild and red. Let me go. I was completely hysterical. Victoria had never seen me like this. She turned to Julian, her expression confused. What happened? I don't know. Julian said, feigning shock. I was just moving the flowers into the greenhouse before I left. Nate came in and shoved me, and I accidentally dropped the pot. I guess he's angry I touched his plants. He spun the story effortlessly, absolving himself of all sin. Victoria's face hardened with fury. She shoved me to the ground, looking down at me with utter contempt. It's just a plant. Are you going to have a complete breakdown over a plant? I see you haven't learned your lesson yet. Just a plant? A pale, pained smile spread across my face. My mother had suffered because of me in life, and now, even in death, she couldn't find peace. A gaping hole had been torn in my chest, and the pain was so immense it was suffocating me. I collapsed onto the ground and wept. Seeing me like that, Victoria's heart, for some reason, clenched with a sudden pain. She had an urge to go to me, to hold me. But Julian pulled her back. Let it go, Tori, he said, his voice a soothing balm of reason. Nate's probably just tired. It's understandable he's on edge. I don't blame him. We're going to be late for the gallery opening. Let's go. We can let him have some space. Victoria, swayed by his words, sighed. She looked down at me, and for the first time in a long time, her voice was gentle. All right, that's enough. Go inside, take a shower, get some sleep. I'll go to the gallery with Julian, and I'll be back early to have dinner with you. She left with Julian. Wait for you to come back. I wouldn't be waiting. Not anymore. A bitter laugh escaped me. I wiped the tears from my face and staggered to my feet, walking back into the house. I found my phone. There were a few new messages on a secure app. It was the supplier for the hyper-realistic prosthetic body, asking for a delivery address. I quickly sent one back. Then I went upstairs and took a shower. When the body arrived, I disabled all the security cameras and had the delivery men carry it to the greenhouse in the backyard. I had built that greenhouse for her. We had promised our lives to each other in there. We had even vowed that when we died, we would be buried there together. She had probably forgotten all about that. Now, I would use my death to make sure she never forgot again. I took one last look around. Then I doused every inch of the flower beds with gasoline. As I walked out, I tossed a lit lighter over my shoulder. The entire structure went up in a whoosh of flame. I disappeared into the night, swallowed by the roaring fire. Goodbye forever, Victoria. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. At that moment, Victoria and Julian were at the gallery. After I had wrecked the first exhibit, she had promised him she would restage it. This time, everything went off without a hitch. A promise fulfilled. It was more than smooth. It was a resounding success. Julian's profile exploded overnight. His name was on everyone's lips. The elite of New York's high society and art world, titans of industry and culture, all came to pay their respects. And he owed it all to Victoria. He watched her from across the room, a goddess holding court, and a powerful sense of possession surged through him. Victoria Croft was his. He'd just been foolish, momentarily blinded by a bad choice, and let this prize slip through his fingers. Now she was powerful, beautiful, wealthy. If he didn't stake his claim, someone else would. He hadn't been sure he could win her back at first, but he soon discovered a weakness in her emotional armor. His abrupt departure years ago hadn't just hurt her. It had left a lingering sense of incompletion, a deep-seated regret. And it was that regret that he had exploited inch by inch. First, he'd found an excuse to move into her mansion. Then, to test the waters, he'd brazenly suggested recreating their intimate photos for a new exhibit. To his surprise, she had agreed. Not only agreed, but she had even forced me to apologize. It was all going more smoothly than he had ever imagined. That's why he had become bolder, more ruthless, with each passing day. Don't blame me for this, Nathaniel, Julian thought with a smirk. He picked up a glass of champagne and sidled up to Victoria, wrapping an arm around her waist. Tori, you should drink less. It's not good for you. The gesture was intimate, and everyone understood its meaning. After the recent media frenzy, all of New York knew about her and the artist. He wasn't just some boy toy. He was the one that got away, her great lost love. In their circles, it wasn't uncommon for powerful women to have younger lovers, but it was rare for one to be so brazenly favored over a husband. It spoke volumes about Julian's place in her heart. He might very well be the next Mr. Croft. The sycophants in the crowd took their cue, raising their glasses. We've been inconsiderate. Mr. Vance is so thoughtful. You're a lucky woman, Ms. Croft. Indeed, Mr. Vance is as talented as he is handsome. He has a brilliant future ahead of him in the art world. Julian basked in the praise, losing himself in the adulation. But Victoria remained cool and distant. While she didn't look pleased, she didn't stop them either. Emboldened, someone else chimed in. Your husband's talent is plain for all to see. If he creates another masterpiece, you must let us know so we can be the first to see it. The title, Husband, was exactly what Julian wanted to hear. He beamed, about to respond, but Victoria cut him off, her voice sharp and cold. Don't use words you don't understand. My husband is at home, waiting for me. The chatter died instantly. The man who had spoken quickly downed 3 glasses of champagne in apology and slunk back into the crowd. The others, getting the message, dispersed. Only Julian was left, the wind taken out of his sails. He forced an awkward smile and changed the subject. Tori, thank you for everything today. Let me take you to dinner. No, Victoria said without a second's thought. I promised Nate I'd be home for dinner with him. It's getting late. I'm leaving. And with that, she turned and walked out. Julian started to follow, but he was intercepted by the woman from the club, the one from his birthday. Victoria got in her car and headed home. An unsettling feeling had been gnawing at her all day. The image of Nate's devastated face kept flashing in her mind, and each time, a sharp pain lanced through her chest. They had been fighting too much lately. It was time to go home and make things right. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. When she got home, she froze. The backyard was engulfed in an orange glow, a pillar of black smoke clawing at the night sky. The greenhouse was being devoured by a raging inferno. Neighbors and building staff were gathered on the lawn, their faces illuminated by the flickering blaze. Nate? Victoria burst into the house. She ran from the living room to the kitchen, then upstairs, checking every room, but he was nowhere. She tried his phone. It went straight to voicemail. She bent over, gasping for breath, her heart hammering like a drum, her mind a chaotic blur. Then she saw the billowing smoke outside the window again. He couldn't be. She flew back down the stairs, pushing through the crowd of onlookers, her eyes scanning desperately for him. Has anyone seen my husband? She cried out. A man hesitated, then stepped forward. I was on my second floor earlier, and I think I saw Mr. Shaw go into the greenhouse, he said, his voice uncertain. But I'm not sure. I don't know if he ever came out. Boom. Victoria's face went deathly pale. The man's words were vague, but even the slightest possibility was more than she could bear. Nate might be in there. The thought obliterated all reason. She couldn't wait for the fire department. She broke through the line of onlookers and charged toward the flames. People shouted, trying to stop her, but it was too late. Ms. Croft, you can't go in there. My God, that fire will kill her. The sounds of the world outside vanished. The moment she stepped inside, thick black smoke enveloped her, choking her, making it impossible to breathe. The fire was much worse from the inside. The greenhouse was over 3,000 square feet, divided into several smaller rooms. She stood frozen, her mind racing. Which room would he be in? Her eyes turned red. The beautiful flowers she remembered were now charred husks. She clenched her fists and ran toward the room where he grew his irises. They were his favorite. Sure enough, as she fought her way through the flames and reached the door of the iris room, she saw a figure inside. Nate was collapsed on the floor. Nate, she screamed. There was no answer. She was choked by another mouthful of smoke, and a racking cough seized her. She tried to go in, but the fire here was too intense. It looked like the origin point. All the plants were burned to ash. Her Nate. A tremor shot through her. She plunged forward, but she'd only taken a few steps when a collapsing, burning beam crashed down, striking her across the back. She fell to the ground with a cry, her vision blurring. She reached a hand out toward the figure of Nate inside. She was so close to saving him. Then, everything went black. In her unconscious state, Victoria dreamed. She saw Nate walk into the greenhouse. When she followed him inside, she saw him douse himself in gasoline. Then, with a whoosh, he was engulfed in flames. He just stood there, unmoving, his face showing no pain. Only a profound, bottomless despair as he looked at her. And then he said, Victoria, I don't want you anymore. Suddenly, Victoria's eyes flew open. She looked around the sterile hospital room, then grabbed the arm of a nearby nurse. Where's Nathaniel Shaw? She couldn't bring herself to ask if he'd been saved. She only asked where he was. She was still clinging to a sliver of hope. But the nurse's next words shattered it completely. He's in the morgue. ####. Victoria froze, her hand falling limp at her side. It felt as if a bolt of lightning had struck her, the blood in her veins turning to ice. An invisible hand squeezed her heart, the pressure suffocating, unbearable. The morgue? Nate. He was dead. She didn't believe it. She couldn't. Tearing the blankets off, she ignored the searing pain from the burns on her back and stumbled out of the room, running blindly toward the morgue. The moment she entered, she saw it. A body on a gurney, covered by a white sheet. She trembled, staggering forward. Slowly, her hand reached out and pulled back the sheet. The face that stared up at her was horrifically burned. Her world imploded. She nearly collapsed, one hand bracing against the cold metal table, the other reaching out to touch the charred face. Though the skin was mostly gone, she recognized the shape of his eyes, his brow. It was him. It was Nate. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor. The shock was too much. She doubled over, vomiting a bitter acid rising in her throat, her stomach twisting in agony. Her assistant, Alex, rushed in and helped her up. Ms. Croft, you're still injured. You need to take care of yourself. About the fire. The fire department has reached a conclusion. Victoria looked up, grabbing his arm, her eyes red-rimmed and frantic. What conclusion? They've ruled it a suicide. Self-immolation. Self-immolation? Even though she'd been expecting it, hearing the words out loud was devastating. Why? Why would Nate kill himself? Suddenly, her face crumpled with regret. She knelt beside the body, her words a frantic, whispered confession. Was it because we were fighting? Even if you were angry with me, how could you do this? You could leave me, but how could you be so cruel as to leave your mother? The mention of his mother sparked a thought. She looked up at Alex. Right now, go to the rehab center. Check on Mrs. Shaw. See what she knows. If she doesn't know anything, don't tell her. I'm afraid she won't be able to handle it. Yes, Ms. Croft. He hurried out. Nate loved his mother more than anything. He would have died for her. How could he choose to kill himself without a word? Nate. Victoria bowed her head, her body trembling uncontrollably. A tear fell onto the burned hand on the gurney. Please, just open your eyes and look at me, she begged. But the man on the table remained still. Time stretched on. She felt as if all her energy, her very soul, had been drained away. She slumped against the gurney, utterly defeated. Alex returned, panting. Ms. Croft. The people at the rehab center. They said Mrs. Shaw passed away. A while ago. Victoria's eyes widened in shock. What did you say? She couldn't believe it. But at the same time, she understood. She finally understood why Nate had been so determined to die. It's true, Alex continued. To be sure, I went to the cemetery. They said that about 5 days ago, Mr. Shaw buried her ashes there. 5 days ago. That was... Victoria's face grew paler by the second. She hadn't even had time to process this new shock when Alex spoke again. And she glared at him. And what? And yesterday, Mrs. Shaw's ashes were removed from the grave. By Mr. Vance. ####. Julian? Victoria couldn't believe he was involved in this, too. But how did he know Nate's mother had died? And why would he take her ashes? The questions were horrifying, the implications chilling. Suddenly, she remembered Nate's strange behavior in the yard yesterday. He'd been on his hands and knees, clawing at the dirt. It hadn't looked like he was mourning the loss of a plant. It looked like he was desperately trying to hold on to something. Could it be? A shudder racked her body. Her eyes turned cold and hard, a murderous aura emanating from her. Find out everything, she snarled, her voice low and dangerous. I want to know everything he has done for the past week. Her roar echoed in the cold, sterile morgue. Alex jumped, startled, and hurried out of the room without another word. After her outburst, Victoria felt like a deflated balloon. She kept a silent vigil by Nate's side, the panic in her heart growing exponentially. Nate, what really happened? She whispered, clutching his hand. She already knew the answer, or at least most of it, but she continued to lie to herself. What did I do that was so terrible you didn't even want to live anymore? Please don't punish me like this. Wake up, please. If you wake up, you can hit me, scream at me. I'll take it. Just don't be dead. If you're dead, what am I supposed to do? I can't live without you. She knelt on the floor, her confession dissolving into sobs. But in the grim silence of the room, the only sound was her own tragic weeping. Her husband was dead. It was just like in her dream. He didn't want her anymore, and he was never coming back. Victoria clutched her chest, her heart feeling as if it had stopped beating. Even the dust motes in the air seemed to hang still. With a thud, she collapsed to the floor, consciousness slipping away once more. But the pain in her heart raged on. When she woke, it was morning. She sat up in her hospital bed, staring blankly at the dawn outside her window. Alex came in, looking exhausted. Her gaze finally shifted. Tell me. Alex looked at her pale face, his own expression nervous. He finally spoke. I looked into the cause of Mrs. Shaw's death. The staff at the rehab center said she had a heart attack after seeing a news report. The one about Mr. Shaw smashing Mr. Vance's art exhibit. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. What? But I told you to have that story pulled. How could she have seen it? It wasn't me, Ms. Croft, Alex said, shaking his head. It was Mr. Vance. He paid someone to go into her room and turn on the television. The story was a trending topic. Every news channel was covering it. That's how she saw it. He paused, then added in, the rehab center called you that night. Multiple times. They said you never answered. In the end, Mr. Shaw took care of the arrangements for his mother's body himself. He told them not to contact you. Victoria's face was ashen. She searched her memory. What had she been doing that night? She had been comforting a distraught Julian. She had even berated Nate for being childish. She had been completely blinded. It had all been Julian's scheme. She was responsible for Mrs. Shaw's death. And Nate, how much pain must he have been in? No wonder he hadn't come home for 2 days. She thought he was sulking, but he had been dealing with his mother's funeral alone. Victoria's hands clenched the bedsheets, regret and rage threatening to suffocate her. Alex spoke again, his voice trembling. There's more. Spit it out, she roared, her voice low and tight. He flinched. I also found the woman from the club. She wasn't hired by Mr. Shaw. She's Mr. Vance's former sugar mama. They've known each other for 6 years. Back when he was still dating you in college. The reason he suddenly broke up with you was because he left the country with her. He was her kept man for 5 years. ####. The news was a thunderbolt from a clear sky. Victoria couldn't believe she had been living in a world of Julian's lies for so long. She had spent years blaming herself for their breakup, haunted by regret. While she had been drowning her sorrows, mourning him, he had been sleeping with another woman. It was laughable. It was disgusting. All his talk of chasing his dreams, of having no choice. It was all bullshit, and she had believed him. Not only had she believed him, but she had let him back into her life, into her home, out of some misplaced nostalgia. She had helped him, promoted him, built his career. And in doing so, she had driven Nate to despair, to his death. She had lost the only person who had ever truly loved her. So, Nate was framed. Victoria's body shook uncontrollably. The scene from the auction flashed in her mind. Nate had told her it wasn't him, but she had chosen to believe Julian. She had forced Nate to watch her sleep with Julian. The call from the police station. She had left him to rot in a cell. All the little signs, the inconsistencies she had ignored, they came flooding back like thousands of ants crawling over her brain, eating her alive. Crash! She swept her arm across the bedside table, sending everything tumbling to the floor. She began to beat her own head with her fists, a desperate attempt to stop the torment. Ms. Croft, don't. Alex rushed forward to stop her. He had never seen his boss like this, so completely devoid of her usual calm and composure. But it was understandable. Her husband was dead, and the great love of her life turned out to be nothing more than a cheap gigolo. Anyone would break. After a long time, Victoria calmed down. She dismissed everyone from the room, her voice a dead monotone. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the last week in her mind. Every one of Julian's actions, every crime Nate had been accused of, was likely a setup. The auction. She had locked Nate in the dark shed without a second thought, forgetting his claustrophobia, forgetting he couldn't sleep without a light on. Julian's injured hand. In a fit of rage, she had ordered her men to smash Nate's hand, forgetting he was a brilliant pianist, that his hands were his life. The things she had discovered, the things she hadn't. Every memory was another slash of a knife across her heart. One by one, they piled up until her heart was nothing but a shredded, bleeding mess. Nate, I'm so sorry. Victoria curled into a ball, tears streaming down her face, her sobs filling the empty room. It was a heartbreaking sound, but there were no second chances in this world. Nate would not be coming back from the dead. She lay there all morning, motionless. The food they brought her went untouched. She wished she could just fall asleep and never wake up. Suddenly, her phone rang. The caller ID read, Julian. Victoria's eyes went dark. She sat up, her gaze fixed on the name on the screen. A murderous intent slowly began to surface. She answered the call. Tori, where are you? Julian's voice came through the speaker. Victoria clenched her fist, not answering. He asked again. I just got back and the greenhouse is completely burned down. And I heard Nate is dead. His probing tone was laced with an unmistakable glee. The sound pierced Victoria's heart. Her nails dug into her palm. She forced her voice to be steady. Yes, Nate is dead. Don't go anywhere. Stay at the house. I'm on my way. ####. Nathaniel Shaw was really dead. The news sent a jolt of pure exhilaration through Julian. He couldn't believe it. He'd been gone for one night, and fate had removed his biggest obstacle. Humming a cheerful tune, he went upstairs. He took a long shower, scrubbing away the scent of the old woman he'd just left. He looked at the marks on his body in the mirror, his expression one of pure disgust. He thought he'd been free of her when he returned to the States, but Rebecca was like a piece of gum stuck to his shoe. She had secretly followed him back and was now trying to blackmail him for $100 million. He couldn't get that kind of money even if he sold himself into slavery. He'd been tempted to just let her expose him, but he was so close. He had Victoria back. He had a career. He couldn't bear to destroy it all now. And Rebecca knew it. Rebecca was the woman from a club. She had been the one waiting for him outside the gallery last night, the one who had drugged him and had her way with him all night. She had patted his cheek, her voice dripping with resentment. I spent a lot of money on you over the years. The second I run into trouble, you disappear. That's very hurtful. Now you've latched onto someone new. Consider the other night a welcome back gift. $100 million is nothing to that woman. Don't make me leak our little home movies. I still have them, you know. He had no choice but to submit. He had to swallow his pride and endure Rebecca's threats. $100 million was nothing to Victoria Croft. He couldn't give up now. And now, it seemed even the heavens were on his side. Nathaniel Shaw was dead. It was only a matter of time before he became Victoria's husband. $100 million would be pocket change. Buoyed by this thought, Julian changed his clothes and went downstairs, feeling refreshed and confident. He saw Victoria standing in the living room. Her face was grim. She was holding their wedding photo, her eyes red and swollen from crying. A pang of jealousy shot through him. He had, at one point, genuinely loved her. Seeing her grieve for another man still stung. But why waste energy on a dead man? Julian quickly schooled his features into an expression of concern. He walked to her side. Tori, what happened? How could Nate just die like that? He even managed to look heartbroken. Victoria turned to look at him. If she hadn't already known the truth, she might have been fooled by his performance. He was a truly gifted actor, a master manipulator. I came home yesterday, and the greenhouse was on fire. Nate was inside. The fire department ruled it a suicide. Why do you think he would do something like that? Suicide? Julian's eyes widened in shock. He had assumed it was an accident. He hadn't expected Nate to take his own life. Why? The reason was obvious. He had been driven to despair. It seemed his efforts had paid off. Nate had completely given up on Victoria. The desecration of his mother's ashes had been the final straw. But he couldn't say any of that. I can't imagine, Julian said, playing dumb. Maybe he felt guilty for all the trouble he caused and couldn't live with himself. It's my fault. I should have talked to him before I left for the gallery. Even now, with Nate dead, he was still blaming him. Victoria's eyes grew darker, colder. She wanted to tear him to pieces. But he was oblivious, moving to embrace her. Tori, don't be so sad. I'll always be here for you. Being here for me requires a title, she said, her voice flat. Can you marry me? Julian's heart soared. He pulled back, his face alight with excitement. Can I? Just as his hopes reached their peak, Victoria's hand flew up and slapped him hard across the face. In your dreams, she snarled. Julian stared at her, his face a mixture of shock and confusion. His first instinct was to hit her back, but he suppressed the urge, his face turning red with fury. Tori, did I say something wrong? Why did you hit me? It's not what you said, it's what you did. Victoria's eyes were bloodshot. Did you really think you could fool me forever? Do you know what you did to Nate? Do I need to list your crimes, one by one? I never realized what a good actor you were. You played me like a fool from the very beginning. You framed Nate again and again, until you drove him to his death. Julian, you deserve to die. She launched herself at him, hitting him with a barrage of frantic blows. So she knew. She knew everything. Julian was caught off guard. Admitting it now would be suicide. All his work would have been for nothing. No, he couldn't give up now. I didn't. He shook his head, denying everything. Tori, what are you talking about? I don't understand. Don't listen to whoever is spreading these lies, trying to slander me. I would never hurt Nate. You're still denying it. Victoria's face was contorted with rage. She snapped her fingers, and several large bodyguards entered the room. They grabbed Julian and slammed him to the floor. Julian curled into a ball as they rained blows down on him. He was powerless to fight back. Victoria made no move to stop them. He was terrified, desperate. When he was bruised and bloody, she finally signaled for them to stop. Julian lay on the floor, gasping for air, his body trembling, blood trickling from his mouth. I'm giving you one last chance, Victoria said, looking down at him. She was like a queen of the underworld, waiting for his confession. If he dared to lie again, he knew the tortures of hell awaited him. He was broken. He stopped fighting. I'll talk. Julian gasped, his body shaking. I admit it. I used some tricks to frame Nate a few times. But I did it because I love you. I was so in love with you, so jealous of him. I just wanted us to be together again. It was his last resort, the love card. He was gambling on her heart, praying that she still held some lingering affection for him. But he had forgotten that their love story was already tarnished. Victoria's eyes narrowed. She grabbed his chin, her grip like a vice. You don't get to talk to me about love. The word coming from your mouth makes me sick. Besides, wasn't this the woman you loved? She gestured to her assistant. 2 more bodyguards entered, dragging a barely conscious woman behind them. It was Rebecca. The woman who had been so arrogant yesterday was now a broken mess on the floor. Her face was swollen and bruised, her body covered in countless cuts, still oozing blood. A trail of blood stretched from the doorway to where Julian lay. It was a horrific sight. The blood drained from Julian's face. His teeth chattered. No, that's not. Let me explain. He looked at Victoria, terrified, but his mind was blank. He had no more lies left. All he could do was beg. I was wrong, Tori. I shouldn't have deceived you. I shouldn't have hurt Nate. I'll never do it again. Please, let me go. Let you go. Victoria's lips curved into a chilling smile. I could consider it. Julian's heart leaped with a desperate hope. But then she said, my terms are simple. You suffer everything Nate suffered. An eye for an eye. I think that's fair, don't you? She let go of his chin. 2 bodyguards stepped forward, pinning Julian to the floor. Another man entered from the doorway, holding a familiar-looking iron hammer. Julian's eyes widened in terror. No, Tori, no, he screamed, struggling with all his might. But he was like a lamb on the altar, completely helpless. I was wrong. I can beg for Nate's forgiveness. Please, let me go. Victoria was unmoved. She sat on the sofa, watching him with cold, empty eyes, not a shred of pity in them. The hammer rose high in the air, then fell. Aard! A blood-curdling scream filled the room. Julian's right hand was a mangled mess. He lay on the floor, moaning in agony, cold sweat pouring down his pale face. The pain was excruciating, unforgettable. Nate must have been in this much pain, too. Victoria's eyes were dark and stormy. This wasn't enough. It would never be enough. She raised her hand and made another gesture. The men understood. One of them moved to Julian's other side, and without hesitation, brought the hammer down on his left hand. Aard! Another scream, weaker this time. Julian couldn't believe it. Tears streamed down his face. Victoria, you're heartless, he choked out. Yes, I framed Nathaniel. But I only got away with it because you let me. You chose to believe me. You were the one who offered yourself to me as an antidote. If I'm the killer, you're the accomplice. Why should I be the only one to pay? Shut up. Victoria's face flushed, then paled. His words hit their mark, forcing her to confront her own guilt. But she couldn't admit it. She could only channel her shame into more rage, more punishment for him. They dragged Julian to the backyard and threw him into the storage shed. Then, a group of homeless people, seemingly summoned from nowhere, descended on the shed, scrambling to get inside. The door slammed shut, and Julian's nightmare began. The women tore at his clothes, their hands all over him. They forced drugs down his throat, one after another, and took their pleasure from his body without pause. He passed out and woke up over and over. The smell of filth, sweat, and sex filled the small, dark space. Julian felt like he was being drained dry. He tried to fight, to scream for help, but his hands were useless, every movement in agony. His voice was gone, worn down to a raw whisper. He had never known such despair, such humiliation. He lay naked on the filthy floor, a broken doll discarded in a dumpster, trampled underfoot by scavengers. The Julian Vance of yesterday was gone forever. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened. The homeless people stumbled out, sated. The fresh air that blew and did little to dispel the stench inside. He was nothing but an empty shell. Victoria walked in and squatted down beside him. Her eyes held none of their former warmth. You're responsible for 2 deaths. I thought about killing you, but that would be too easy. I want you to live with this broken body, with this shame, for the rest of your miserable life. You can go now, but don't ever let me see you in New York City again, or I will make your life even more of a living hell. She stood up and walked out. Julian watched her retreating back, his eyes burning with a deep, venomous hatred. Victoria Croft, this isn't over. ####. The revenge was complete, but Victoria felt nothing but a vast, aching emptiness. She left the shed and went straight to the master bedroom. She had brought Nate's body back from a morgue. He now lay in a custom-made, refrigerated glass coffin. She knelt beside it, her hand resting on the cold glass above his face. All she felt was a rough, icy sensation. Nothing else. Her heart sank into a bottomless abyss. Nate, she whispered, I've made Julian pay. Does that make you feel any better? Can you forgive me? Forgive me for being so foolish. It was a monumental foolishness. The events of the past week replayed in her mind, each memory a fresh wave of pain. If she hadn't mistakenly trusted Julian, Nate wouldn't have been driven to such despair. Julian was right. If he was the killer, she was the accomplice. The killer had been punished. What about the accomplice? Perhaps she already knew the answer. She looked at the sleeping figure in the coffin. I've had them start rebuilding the greenhouse. It will be just like it was before, filled with all your favorite flowers. Just wait a little longer. Soon, you'll be able to rest in peace there. It was a promise they had made to each other. Years ago, she had built the greenhouse for him as an anniversary gift. He had idly mentioned wanting a secret garden of his own, and she had made it a reality. It was there that she had proposed to him. Nate had loved that greenhouse. Whenever he wasn't busy, he would be there, and she would join him, watching him arrange flowers, prune plants, lose himself in his work. It became their sanctuary. She had told him she wanted to watch him garden for the rest of her life, until they were old and gray. She had felt so happy then. But a lifetime is a long time, and promises are easily forgotten. She didn't know when it started, but she had stopped going to the greenhouse. Soon, it was only Nate's solitary figure there. And then, eventually, he had stopped going too. You're punishing me, aren't you? Tears streamed down her face. I was the one who broke our promise first. That's why you lost hope. You chose to die in the greenhouse to remind me, didn't you? I won't forget again, Nate. Wait for me. Her mournful cries filled the room all night. For the next 10 days, Victoria didn't go anywhere. She stayed in the room, keeping a vigil by Nate's side. When the greenhouse was rebuilt, she had his body cremated. She held a funeral there. Most of New York's elite came to pay their respects. Though the whispers of his suicide had made the rounds, everyone was outwardly respectful. It was the least they could do for the dead. The day was a long blur of rituals and condolences. When it was over, she sent everyone away. They all told her to take care of herself, to move on. Easy for them to say. She sat before Nate's gravestone, silent. After a long time, she pulled a letter from her pocket. It was her suicide note. The past few days had been an agony. She missed him with every fiber of her being. Now, She could finally be free. She touched the photo on the gravestone, her face softening with a love she had never shown him in life. She hadn't known how to cherish him. Only now that he was gone did she realize what she had lost. Nate, don't go too fast. Wait for me. A small smile touched her lips. She swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills. Within half an hour, the drugs took effect. She collapsed in front of the gravestone, her vision going black, her breathing becoming shallow. But she felt no fear. She was going to see the person she longed for. Nate. Ms. Croft. Her assistant, Alex, had returned. Seeing the scene before him, he scooped her up in his arms and raced to the hospital. After another frantic battle to save her, she survived. ####. 3 years later, the private room at the club was dim and pulsing with music. A crowd of New York's young and wealthy were playing some drunken party game. On a plush sofa, holding court, sat Victoria Croft. Next to her, so close he was practically in her lap, sat a young man with a delicate face and eyes that were hauntingly familiar. He was the latest in a long line of Nate's replacements. The city of New York hadn't changed much with one man's absence, but Victoria Croft had. Since her failed suicide attempt, she was a different person. She had once avoided the city's decadent nightlife. Now, she went through lovers like tissues, each one bearing some resemblance to Nathaniel Shaw. After 3 years, everyone was used to it. The young man she had with her tonight, Connor, was the most strikingly similar of them all. Rumor had it she had spent 3 months and over $100 million to win him over. Jewelry, designer bags, supercars, a penthouse. Whatever Connor asked for, it was delivered the next day, no questions asked. Her devotion was plain for all to see. Because of this, the others in the room were careful to treat him with respect. One of them approached, raising a glass. Victoria, this is our first time meeting the new Mr. Croft. Let's all toast him. A wave of nervous tension swept through the room. Mr. Croft was a forbidden title. Someone had made the mistake of using it on a previous replacement, and Victoria had flown into a terrifying rage. No one could replace Nathaniel Shaw. No one could take his title. But this time, Victoria didn't get angry. She simply paused and looked up. Connor doesn't drink, she said, her voice cool. You all can go ahead. She then picked up her own glass and drank for him. The crowd, taking this as a sign of Connor's elevated status, swarmed him, offering him juice, asking what games he wanted to play. Connor, for his part, was sweet and agreeable, smiling at everyone, sitting obediently by Victoria's side like a harmless puppy, just like Nate used to be. Then, another young man at the table spoke up. If I didn't know your name, I'd swear you were my girlfriend's brother. You guys look exactly alike. His girlfriend nudged him hard. My boyfriend just got back from living abroad, she explained, laughing nervously. He thinks any two people from the same city look alike. Don't mind him. The boyfriend was new to the scene and didn't know the history. But his girlfriend knew better. To say Connor looked like someone else in front of Victoria was to indirectly say he looked like Nate. That was dangerous territory. But it was too late. Victoria's dark eyes lit up. Oh, and who is your girlfriend's brother? Connor visibly tensed. The clueless boyfriend, thinking he had captured Victoria's interest, pulled out his phone and found a photo, holding it up for her to see. Here, look. This is him. The photo showed a man and a woman, smiling brightly. The woman was Aria Sterling, the biggest pop star in the country. The man next to her was the mystery guest from a recent concert, the one who had been rumored to be her secret boyfriend. Just yesterday, her team had issued a statement clarifying he was her older brother. Victoria glanced at the photo, uninterested, but then her eyes locked on the man's face, and her heart began to pound. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was Nathaniel Shaw. The shape of his face, the curve of his smile, even the 2 dimples that appeared when he laughed. It was all identical. If she hadn't personally overseen Nate's cremation, she would have sworn it was him. Or maybe, a wild, impossible thought took root in her mind. She grabbed the young man's arm, her grip tight. Who did you say he is? What's his name? I think. His name is Nathaniel Sterling. ###. Achoo. Nathaniel Sterling sneezed behind his face mask. His sister, Aria, who was driving, grinned at him. Bro, you're more famous than I am right now. Everyone on the internet is saying you're handsome enough to be a celebrity. You should consider it. She wiggled her eyebrows playfully. Nathaniel shot her a look. Stop teasing me. The second I get back in the country, you drag me into a media frenzy. Now I have to wear a mask everywhere I go. It's fine. The buzz will die down. The internet will forget in a week. Besides, we're brother and sister. What are you afraid of? Aria said, her eyes on the road, not noticing the complex expression on her brother's face. Nathaniel didn't answer. He turned to look out the window. He wasn't afraid of anything. He just didn't want certain people to see him, to know that Nathaniel Shaw was still alive. That's right. Nathaniel Sterling was Nathaniel Shaw. As the tall buildings of Los Angeles blurred past, his mind drifted back 3 years. After he had set the fire, he had left New York and returned to his hometown of Savannah, Georgia. He moved into the small house his mother had left him, planning to start over. But not long after, someone had come looking for him. He had assumed it was someone sent by Victoria, but the man said he was there on behalf of his father. Father? The word was foreign to him. He had grown up with just his mother. He had never met his father, never even seen a picture of him. He didn't know his name. Every time he had asked about his father, his mother would dissolve into tears. Eventually, he had stopped asking, but that day, he had learned the truth. His father had been looking for them for years. He had learned the story of his parents. They had been deeply in love, engaged to be married. Just before the wedding, his mother had wanted to go on one last solo backpacking trip, something she'd always dreamed of. His father had supported her. They went to a famous hiking spot in the Rockies. On the trail, they met a group of fellow hikers. They hit it off and decided to explore together. But one of the men in the group had tried to assault his mother. His father had intervened and, in the struggle, had accidentally killed the man. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison for manslaughter. His father's parents had blamed his mother for everything. They forbade her from visiting the prison, from even setting foot in their home. And it was then that she discovered she was pregnant. His paternal grandparents were ashamed. They told her to get an abortion and find someone else to marry. But she refused. She ended up homeless, cast out by everyone. To survive, she had moved far away and raised Nathaniel on her own. 5 years later, she had secretly gone back to the prison, hoping to be there when he was released. But the guards told her he had been released a year early. She had assumed he had abandoned them. Meanwhile, his father, released early for good behavior, couldn't find her. His own parents were seriously ill, and he had to stay home to care for them. After they passed away, he moved away to start a new life. And so, they had lost each other. Over the years, his father had worked his way up from a small-time vendor to a business tycoon, one of the most powerful men in Los Angeles. But he had never stopped looking for them. And now, he had found him. Nathaniel had learned the truth and reconnected with his father. He had become the eldest son of the Sterling family. He had changed his name to Nathaniel Sterling. The memories faded as the car pulled into the driveway of the Sterling estate. The family was gathered in the dining room, about to eat. Nathaniel looked around, not seeing his other sister. Is Eliza not coming home for dinner tonight? He asked out of habit. He had 2 half-sisters. One was a business prodigy who was set to inherit the Sterling empire. The other was a gifted singer who had become a pop star. Eliza and Arya. Don't wait for her, his father, David Sterling, said as he walked in. There's a situation at the company she needs to handle. Let's eat. Since he had begun to hand over the reins to Eliza, he was able to come home for dinner more often. To celebrate, his wife, Catherine, had cooked a feast. Mom, you're playing favorites, Arya pouted. The second Dad and Nate come home, you cook all this. You never cook for me when I'm home alone. Nathaniel tapped her on the head. Do you ever have time to eat at home? He chided, playing the part of the older brother. Don't think I don't know. Annie Carroll told me you drive right past the house all the time without stopping. You're lucky to get any food at all. He's right, you little rascal, Catherine said, bringing a tureen of soup to the table, her smile warm. If your brother hadn't dragged you back home, you'd be gone again. I can't control you anymore. All right, let's eat, David said, and the playful bickering stopped. In just 3 years, he had a family again. He had the fatherly love he had missed his whole life. Catherine treated him like her own son. His 2 sisters adored him. If his mother knew, she could finally rest in peace. The meal was a happy affair. Halfway through, Catherine said, Nate, tomorrow is your birthday. Your father and I are planning to throw a big party for you here at the house. Nathaniel looked up. His father placed a piece of meat in his bowl. That's right. You've been studying abroad for the past 2 years. We haven't had a chance to properly introduce you to everyone. This is a good opportunity, and a chance for you to meet some nice young women. The last sentence was the real purpose, of course. Nathaniel's smile faded. Dad, I'm not planning on getting married anytime soon. I'm not saying you have to get married, David said before he could refuse. Just think of it as networking with people your own age. It will be good for your future. Besides, my son is an exceptional young man. You have to let your old man show you off a little. He couldn't refuse after that. This was Los Angeles. Even if he made a public appearance, no one would know he was Nathaniel Shaw. With that thought, his anxiety lessened. But the news still traveled to New York. After she left the club, Victoria immediately had her people investigate Nathaniel Sterling. The next day, she had her answer. You're saying he was adopted into the Sterling family? Yes. David Sterling only had 2 daughters. Then, 3 years ago, a son suddenly appeared. The rumor in their circle is that he's an illegitimate child. And I just found this out. Today is supposedly Nathaniel Sterling's birthday. The Sterling family is throwing a huge party to officially introduce him to society. 3 years ago, and a birthday party? Nate's birthday was also today. A resemblance could be a coincidence. But the timing of his adoption, the birthday, it couldn't all be a coincidence. It was him. It was Nathaniel Shaw. Victoria shot to her feet. Book me a flight to Los Angeles. Immediately, she grabbed her bag and walked out of her study. Connor was sitting nervously in the living room. Seeing her about to leave, he rushed over and grabbed her arm. Victoria, what's wrong? Where are you going? Victoria paused, as if just remembering he was there. She turned to look at him, her eyes devoid of their former warmth. We're over, she said, her voice cold. I want you out of my house by the end of the day. The whiplash was staggering. One day, she was showering him with affection. The next, she was ice. He couldn't accept it. He tightened his grip on her arm. Why? No reason. I'm just bored of you. And with that, she pulled her arm away and left. ####. On the sprawling lawn behind the Sterling mansion, the birthday party was in full swing. The decorations were lavish and elegant. The guests had arrived. All that was missing was the man of the hour. Nathaniel, still unaware of the storm brewing in New York, was inexplicably nervous. He wasn't a timid person. He had attended countless galas and events with Victoria. But this was different. This was under a new identity. Catherine sensed his anxiety. She took his arm, her voice gentle. Don't be nervous. Just think of it as a family dinner. We're all here. Okay. Thanks, Catherine. They walked into the party together. Under the watchful eyes of the guests, Catherine led him to his father. David took his hand, and they walked to the main stage together. Tonight, I want to thank all of you for coming to celebrate my son Nathaniel's birthday. David's voice, amplified by the microphone, was thick with emotion. I'm sure you're all curious as to how I suddenly have a son. You might even be speculating that he's illegitimate. I'm here to tell you that he is not. He is the rightful heir of the Sterling family. Nate is the son of my first love and me. Due to some tragic circumstances, we were separated for many years. He and his mother suffered greatly. Now, his birth mother is no longer with us. As his father, I will spend the rest of my life making it up to him, loving him, protecting him, and ensuring he never suffers again. He is my precious son. I hope you will all look out for him in the future. The crowd erupted in applause. David's heartfelt speech silenced all the rumors. Nathaniel had made his grand entrance into Los Angeles society. He stood on the stage, his eyes wet with tears, not because of the honor, but because of his father's promise to love and protect him. That was enough. Just then, Aria began to play the piano. Eliza came onto the stage, took Nathaniel's hand, and led him to the dance floor. The three siblings dancing together was a powerful statement of unity. After the dance, the party resumed its lively pace. Guests came to offer their congratulations. Nathaniel, flanked by his family, began to make the rounds. In the midst of the mingling, a woman approached them. Mr. Sterling, she said to David. Nathaniel turned. It was her. As he stared in surprise, David broke into a rare, genuinely pleased smile. Sloan, when did you get back in the country? Sloan Davenport smiled politely. Just recently. She then turned her gaze to Nathaniel. I heard you had found your long-lost son, Mr. Sterling. I came to offer my congratulations. I didn't expect to run into Mr. Sterling here. The rest of the family looked surprised. Aria studied the two of them, a mischievous glint in her eye. Sloan, you know my brother? We've met once. He left quite an impression, Sloan said, her eyes twinkling with amusement as she looked at him. Remembering his drunken, embarrassing behavior, Nathaniel's face flushed. He managed an awkward laugh. We met once abroad. Well, it seems you two are destined to know each other, David chuckled. He then asked, Sloan, I hear you've been doing great things at your father's overseas branch. Old Walter must be proud. Are you back to take over the main company? You're too kind, Mr. Sterling, Sloan said with a modest smile, her demeanor poised and elegant. I'm here to help my father out, and hopefully to learn a thing or two from esteemed elders like yourself. Ha, good. So young and so capable. You and Nate are the same age. I was going to introduce you, but it seems you've already met. You two should spend more time together. The implication was clear. Everyone understood. Nathaniel felt even more awkward, but Sloan remained perfectly composed. Of course, she said with a nod. Just then, the butler, Mr. Henderson, approached. He leaned in and whispered to Nathaniel. Young master, there's a Ms. Croft at the gate who wishes to see you. She says she's from New York. Her name is Victoria Croft. Do you know her? ####. Victoria Croft, So, the day had finally come. The name still sent a jolt through him. The color drained from his face. He stood there, frozen, unable to answer. The others noticed something was wrong. Catherine gently touched his back. Nate, do you know this person, mister? Henderson mentioned. I know her, Nathaniel finally said, his voice barely a whisper. A flicker of sadness crossed his face. But I don't want to see her. Mr. Henderson, please tell her that Nathaniel Shaw is dead. I have nothing to say to her. Others might not know the name Nathaniel Shaw, but his family did. It was his former name, but they didn't press him for details. The interruption was a minor ripple in the grand affair of the party. The celebration continued, with Nathaniel making a wish, blowing out candles, and cutting the cake. Late into the night, the party finally wound down, but Victoria was still there. Mr. Henderson had tried reasoning with her, had even called security, but she refused to leave, standing stubbornly at the gate. A line of expensive cars began to pull out of the driveway. She craned her neck, searching for him, but the gate remained closed after the last car left. A low rumble of thunder sounded in the distance, and fat drops of rain began to fall, soaking her. Mr. Henderson's words had given her a spark of hope. Her husband wasn't dead. He was just angry. That's why he wouldn't see her. That was fine. She could wait. She would wait a lifetime if she had to. Inside, Nathaniel told his family everything. He hadn't told them before because he thought it was over. He didn't want to reopen old wounds. But he hadn't expected Victoria to find out, to follow him here. He didn't understand why she had come. Hadn't Julian stopped her? This didn't seem like his style at all. His mind was a mess. But the most important thing now was to explain everything to his family, to not cause them any trouble. Dad, Catherine, he said, his head bowed, his fingers twisting together. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hide this from you. I didn't want to talk about her anymore. I thought I had handled it. David sat in his armchair, silent. He didn't say a word, but the pressure in the room was immense. Nathaniel might not know, but Catherine and his sisters knew this was the calm before the storm. Oh, you silly boy. Catherine rushed to his side, her voice full of warmth and comfort, not a hint of blame. We're family. You don't need to apologize. This isn't your fault. She's right, Arya said, her voice sharp with anger. That woman went too far. How dare she treat my brother like that? And now she has the nerve to show up here. I'm going to go have a word with this bitch. Before anyone could stop her, she stormed out of the room. Eliza also stood up. Nate, don't blame yourself, she said, her voice calm, but her eyes cold as ice. You have us to back you up now? I like to see what this Victoria Croft is capable of. Eliza was always the more level-headed one, but when her family was threatened, she was ruthless. Victoria Croft's business empire was about to face some serious turbulence. David finally stood up. He walked to Nathaniel and placed a hand on his shoulder. His voice was thick with emotion. It's my fault. I let you suffer for so long, and I let your mother's final rest be disturbed. Leave this to your sisters. You don't have to do anything. We'll take care of it for you. His words struck a deep chord in Nathaniel's heart. So this was what it felt like to be protected by family. It was a good feeling. ####. Outside, the main gate opened. Victoria's eyes lit up. She thought it was Nathaniel, finally coming out to see her. She took a step forward, but it was a young woman who emerged. Arya Sterling held an umbrella high, her eyes sharp and predatory as she stared at Victoria, her mind filled with the stories of her brother's suffering. Hello, I'm looking for Thwack. Before Victoria could finish, Arya kicked her hard in the chest, sending her sprawling to the ground. Victoria clutched her chest, stunned. When she looked up and saw Arya's face, she recognized the pop star from the news. Nathaniel's new sister. I know you, Victoria said, pushing herself up, her voice filled with a desperate hope. I'm here to see your brother. I'm your sister-in-law. Can you please let Nate see me? Another kick landed, this one to her side. Arya threw down her umbrella, knelt, and rained a series of blows down on Victoria. Then she grabbed her by the hair. You're not worthy of being my sister-in-law. My brother is done with you. Now, get the hell out of here. She threw Victoria to the ground. Victoria lay there, bruised and battered, the rain washing the blood from her face. She was a pathetic sight, but she still wouldn't give up. She reached out and grabbed the hem of Arya's pants. No, there's been a misunderstanding. I just found out he's alive. Please, just let me see him. Let go. Arya looked down at the woman at her feet with contempt. When Victoria refused to let go, Arya picked up the broken umbrella. Without a moment's hesitation, she plunged the sharp, jagged end into the back of Victoria's hand. Arg! Victoria screamed and let go. A group of bodyguards appeared. They hauled the whimpering, bleeding Victoria to her feet. Arya shot her a final disgusted look. Throw her out. Far away from here. I don't want her filth anywhere near this house. and she turned and walked back inside without a backward glance. Victoria didn't show up again after that night. Nathaniel stayed home for a few days, assuming she had finally given up. That afternoon, he went out to meet someone. Sloane Davenport was already at the cafe. She sat by the window, the picture of elegance and grace. Even passersby on the street couldn't help but stare. And to think he had mistaken her for a prostitute during his time abroad. The memory of that drunken, debauched night made him cringe. If it wasn't for his father's insistence, he wouldn't be here. He walked over and sat down across from her. "Ms. Davenport," he said with a sheepish smile. "What can I do for you?" Sloane looked up, her beautiful almond-shaped eyes fixing on him. She held his gaze until his face turned a deep shade of red. Then she finally spoke. So formal all of a sudden. "Last time we met, you were calling me Sloane." The name sounded familiar. That night, lost in a haze of passion, he had leaned over her, his hand caressing her chin. "What's your name?" he'd asked. "Sloane Davenport," she had purred, her voice husky and seductive. He had been mesmerized, kissing her deeply, their tongues tangling. In the heat of the moment, he had bitten her shoulder, whispering her name. "Sloane." Nathaniel choked on his coffee. He frantically wiped at the stain, the memories of that night still vivid and unsettling. Sloane just smiled. She picked up a napkin and leaned over to dab at the corner of his mouth. As she did, her eyes flickered to something outside the window. Nathaniel felt her gaze shift and turned to look. It was Victoria. Nathaniel froze. The blush instantly drained from his face. He had thought he would never see her again. The fire felt like it had happened yesterday. And yet, here she was 3 years later. Victoria stood outside, her face bruised and swollen, her right hand wrapped in thick gauze. She was disheveled and pathetic, drawing stares from people on the street. Nathaniel's expression soured. He turned back to Sloane and forced a smile. "I'm sorry, something's come up. I have to go. We can talk another time. Or online." He grabbed his jacket and stood up to leave. Sloane stood up too, grabbing his hand. She moved to stand in front of him, her voice low. "Let's go together." They walked out of the cafe side by side. Victoria immediately rushed toward them, her eyes fixed on Nathaniel, her face alight with a desperate hope. "Nate," she began, reaching for his hand. But Sloane stepped in front of him, pulling him into her arms, her expression fierce. "Don't touch my man," she snapped. Victoria stared, a mixture of panic and anger on her face. It felt like something that belonged to her was being stolen right in front of her. But she couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe Nate would be with this woman. "He's my husband," she declared, trying to assert her claim. The word husband made Nathaniel's eyes go cold. He wrapped his arm tighter around Sloane, his voice emotionless as he looked at Victoria. "No, I'm not. Nathaniel Shaw died 3 years ago. My name is Nathaniel Sterling. Ms. Croft, please have some self-respect. Stop harassing me." "No," Victoria cried, her voice breaking. "You are my husband. Don't push me away. Please. Do you have any idea how much I've missed you these past 3 years? I almost died with you that day. They saved me. Do you know how I've survived these last 1,000 days? I've been going insane thinking about you. Don't be so cruel to me." Her words were full of pain, her expression tragic. But all he felt was a bitter amusement. This belated declaration of love was cheaper than dirt. Cruel to her? What she had done to him, that was cruelty. Memories from the last 3 years flashed by, and a wry smile touched his lips. "You have a short memory, Ms. Croft. Have you already forgotten how you treated me for Julian Vance? Don't come here now and pretend to be heartbroken." The mention of Julian made him feel sick. Victoria flinched, her eyes falling, the pain on her face genuine. "Yes, I was wrong. I was blind. I trusted Julian. But I made him pay for what he did. I only found out later that he was behind everything. And my mom. I'm so sorry. Enough." The mention of his mother was a knife to his heart. It was the one thing he could never forgive. He glared at her. "Victoria, why can't you just admit it? You hurt me again and again, not because you were fooled by him, but because you were always in love with him. Your sudden breakup all those years ago. It was an unfinished chapter for you. So when you saw him again, you were still drawn to him. You willingly blinded yourself, defended him unconditionally. I've accepted that fact. I've paid the price for my mistake. Why are you still here, lying to yourself, making us both sick?" His words hit home. Victoria was silent. For 3 years, she had been running from this truth. She had never dared to admit that her own divided heart had led to the death of her mother-in-law and her husband. She didn't know why it had happened. She thought she had fallen in love with Nate. But the moment Julian reappeared, she couldn't help but care for him, want to take care of him. Maybe it was just as he said, a lingering regret, a sense of incompletion. She had finally gotten her closure, and in the process, she had lost the most precious thing in her life. Seeing the agony on her face, Nathaniel felt no pity. He turned to leave. Just then, a figure rushed out from around the corner. Nathaniel Shaw, go to hell. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. A dark liquid flew through the air, aimed straight at him. In a flash, Victoria threw herself in front of Nathaniel. At the same time, Sloane, with lightning-fast reflexes, yanked him back. SSSS. Victoria hissed in pain. A large patch of her back, clothes and skin, sizzled and turned a sickening, charred yellow. It was acid. Are you okay? Nathaniel asked Sloane, his voice tight with concern. That instinctive worry, in that critical moment, sent a warmth through Sloane's chest. She shook her head. But for Victoria, his words were a dagger to the heart. So this is what it felt like to be ignored by the one you love. The pain in her heart was 1,000 times worse than the searing burn on her back. Victoria, the attacker screamed, his voice a deranged howl. Why are you still protecting him? He faked his death. He lied to you. And you still love him? But he doesn't love you anymore. Ha, you deserve this. He was laughing and crying at the same time, a tragic, broken sound. Nathaniel looked at the man. He was rail-thin, almost skeletal. Both of his hands were grotesquely deformed. He could barely hold the glass bottle. And that familiar face. It was Julian. He was shocked. And he finally understood what Victoria had meant when she said she'd made him pay. What are you doing here? Victoria recognized him too, her eyes filled with undisguised loathing. I told you to never show your face in front of me again, or you'd regret it. 3 years, and she was still just as ruthless. Julian's laughter grew wilder. Regret it? Look at me. What more do I have to lose? I'm not afraid of you anymore. In fact, I'm going to take away the one thing you love most. His gaze shifted, locking onto Nathaniel with a murderous intensity. He pulled a knife from somewhere, his target clear. He charged at Nathaniel, screaming, You ruined me. Now I'm going to ruin you. Nathaniel stumbled backward, terrified. Just as Julian was about to reach him, Victoria lunged forward, putting herself between them. The knife plunged into her abdomen. Blood dripped onto the pavement. Nathaniel kicked out, striking Julian's shoulder. He collapsed to the ground, and a moment later, mall security swarmed the scene, tackling him and pinning him down. The area was instantly flooded with onlookers, a chaotic scene of flashing lights and shouting. At the hospital, Victoria was saved. Julian's attack had been clumsy, his hands unsteady. The blade had missed her vital organs by inches. It was a miracle. Nathaniel let out a long, slow breath of relief. She woke up late that night. As her vision cleared, she saw Nathaniel dozing in the chair beside her bed. The scene was a ghost from another lifetime. Years ago, whenever she was sick or came home late from a work function, Nate would sit by her bed, just like this, watching over her all night. She would wake up in the morning to find him there. She reached out, her fingers gently brushing against his hair. The movement woke him. He sat up straight. You're awake. Thank you, Nate, Victoria said, her eyes full of a desperate, longing love that he couldn't miss. He cleared his throat. Don't mention it. I would have done the same for anyone. Since you're awake, I'm going to go. The nurse can help you if you need anything. He stood up to leave. Nate, Victoria called out, tears welling in her eyes. Please, just give me one more chance. He paused at the door. He turned his head, his voice firm and final. My name is Nathaniel Sterling. Nathaniel Shaw is dead. He had died in that fire 3 years ago. She watched his retreating back, and the tears she had been holding back finally fell, her heart aching with the pain so deep it felt like it was being torn apart. She had truly, finally lost him. Her phone on the bedside table began to ring. She looked at the caller ID and answered immediately. A frantic voice on the other end delivered another piece of devastating news. Nathaniel walked out of the hospital, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. At the entrance, he saw a familiar car, still waiting. He walked over and leaned down. Why are you still here? I told you not to wait. Get in, Sloane said, her gaze steady through the car window. He didn't argue. It was late. He was grateful for the ride. But the moment he got in, he was pulled into a fierce embrace. Her perfume filled his senses. He had noticed it when they were abroad. He loved the scent of her perfume. He didn't mind her touch. Was this what they called physical chemistry? Sloane sensed his distraction. Her eyes darkened. She leaned in and bit his neck. You ignore me for that long, and you're still distracted? She murmured. Nathaniel, I'm jealous. Her hand slid down his body, her fingers finding and teasing the sensitive places. MH, a soft sound escaped his lips. He was trembling from her touch. He caught her hand, his voice husky. Not here. Not no. Just not here. The words had barely left his mouth before he felt his own face flush with embarrassment. He coughed lightly. Sloane paused, then let out a soft laugh. She bit his earlobe gently, then cupped his face in her hands and kissed him deeply and possessively. The atmosphere in the car grew thick with desire. They were lost in each other, their kisses growing more frantic, until the air grew thin and Nathaniel felt like he was about to pass out. Only then did Sloane pull away, a satisfied smile on her face. She started the car and drove straight to her apartment. The next day, Nathaniel returned to the Sterling mansion. The moment he walked in, he was ambushed by Arya. "Where were you last night, big brother? You didn't come home. Did those European girls corrupt you?" He didn't really have a good answer for that. As he was trying to come up with an excuse, Eliza walked out from the living room. "Leave him alone," she said to Arya. "Stop teasing him." She turned to Nathaniel. "Don't worry. Sloane called the house last night. Mom and Dad know you were with her. They're fine with it. They won't ask any questions." That only made him feel more embarrassed. When had Sloane called? He had no memory of it. All he remembered was a long, sleepless night, the two of them tangled in the sheets. Then, Eliza's expression turned serious. "By the way, Victoria Croft has been extradited back to New York to cooperate with an investigation. Don't worry. She won't be bothering you again." Nathaniel paused, confused. "Extradited? What do you mean?" "It means she's going to prison. Her art galleries were front. Someone reported her for artificially inflating art prices to launder money. The informant had been Connor. He hadn't been with Victoria for long, but he had overheard enough at her parties to know something illegal was going on. But of course, the real players behind the scenes were the Sterlings. Arya looked triumphant, like a general who had just won a great victory. She pushed Nathaniel toward the dining room. He was still trying to process the news. He had always handled the domestic side of their life, had never asked about Victoria's business. He had no idea she had gone so far down that path. Perhaps they were never meant to be. "Nate," Catherine called his name a few times. He snapped back to reality. "Sorry, Catherine, what did you say?" "I wasn't paying attention. Your auntie was just saying you should invite Sloane over for dinner." "Dad, Catherine, you guys." Nathaniel lowered his head, embarrassed, and began to shovel rice into his mouth, ignoring them. The sound of his family's happy laughter filled the house and drifted out into the sunny Los Angeles morning.